Hi, and welcome to the third bonus tutorial. In the first video, we walked through the process of identifying a solution and building a validation plan. And in the second video, we looked at how to run sprints to learn as quickly as possible if our solution is likely to work. Now, after running a number of sprints, you may find that you have enough information to make a recommendation on the best path forward. Or you may just have hit a pre-agreed checkpoint or reached the end of the funding that you were given. Either way, it's decision time. This means making a recommendation to your boss, your board, or your funders to ask for a bigger investment or to recommend a significant pivot. This tutorial walks through one way in which you might consider setting up your decision-making process to reinforce lean methodologies, and it corresponds to the third worksheet in the bonus materials, the decision recommendation. Of course, you should feel free to tailor all of this to your own organization's processes and culture. Big decisions are always tough, but in the business world, the drivers are generally clear. Is this going to increase your profits? In the world of social good, in theory, the focus should be on whether this will increase your benefit to society. But a lot more factors come into play. Impact can be hard to measure, so it can be easier to focus on more tangible metrics like the number of people reached. Also, many kinds of donors can be more focused on moving stories than on hard data. Finally, given the pressing needs in the world, short-term deliverables can become a higher priority than the fundamentals required for long-term scale. In a way, it's not unlike the dot-com boom when startups were giving their products away at a loss. Eventually, the lack of sustainable business models resulted in the dot-com bust. For this video, I'm going to focus on how we can make data-driven decisions that will maximize social impact. If you look at the websites or annual reports of mission-driven organizations, most will focus on something like this: the number of people reached, and perhaps what people say, along with some compelling individual stories. Now, based on having done the good work, we ask our board, our boss, foundations, or even individual donors to fund us to do more of it. The problem is the number of people reached, what they say, and even the most compelling individual stories don't give us the full picture. Do we know if the training actually worked? Did youth get jobs? Did they keep them? Are we able to do this more cost effectively than the other options that exist? Even if it works, if our solution is more expensive than an equally good alternative, should we be promoting it? And is there a way to scale this? Will we be perpetually coming back to donors for more money for every additional 1,000 youth that we train? Or is there a way to reduce donor dependence over time? Now, let's consider an alternative pitch. Here, we've reached a lot fewer youth, only 100. But we have data to show the effectiveness of the training in getting them jobs, 98%. And the youth are voting with their feet, telling their friends, and demanding the training. Finally, we've determined that this is far more cost-effective than what the government is spending a lot of money doing today. As a result, rather than a pitch to do more of the same, we might ask for funding towards a bigger goal, influencing how government funds are spent. To do so, we might first want to run a trial with 1,000 people so that we can validate these early findings before going to pitch to the government. The promise is that over time, less and less donor money will be needed for greater and greater impact. Chapter 12 of Lean Impact talks about building a culture of innovation in an organization. Leaders can say innovation is important until they're blue in the face. But when it comes down to it, the goals and incentives they create are far more important in driving culture and behavior. If you're told to innovate, but you're measured and rewarded based on executing plans and reaching short-term targets, you're more likely to focus on the latter. how decisions get made is one strong signal that shapes behavior and culture. So, after running several sprints, it's time to compile, digest, and summarize the data and lessons that you've gathered. Now, let's turn back to the example that I was using in the last two videos of youth unemployment and take a look at what the results of my experiments might look like. So here, what I want to do is capture the key results and learnings that came out of my experiments. For example, one of the tests that we talked about in the last video was testing to see if youth would be interested in attending these trainings. The good news is that that hypothesis was validated. What I found was that 82% of the youth were willing to sign up to attend trainings. After that, another thing I might have tested is whether employers were willing to hire these trained youth. Again, another success. The employers were willing to hire 85% of the youth. Finally, among my killer assumptions was the growth hypothesis, that there's enough jobs that exist to employ all these youth. Well, in this case, unfortunately, I would have needed to employ 7% of the population, but unfortunately, there's only jobs that would cover 0.5%. So there's a big gap there. Thus, that hypothesis unfortunately failed. There's a couple other high-risk hypotheses I decided to test as well. One was impact. What was the retention rate after 1 month? Here, the retention rate was good. It was 92%, but fell a little short of my target. So it's inconclusive because I believe that there are things I could do to tweak my programming and training so that I could actually hit that success metric. Another might be growth, whether government or employers are willing to pay. Here, I wanted to have all my costs recovered, and I've gotten up to 80%. So again, not a complete success, but I'm finding that I'm making enough progress here that I believe that I can hit that target over time. So now it's time to capture the results from your solution validation and all the experiments that you've run. So gather up all your sprint worksheets, group them based on the assumption you were testing at the time. Now, note that for a higher level decision, you don't need to include data for each and every experiment that you ran, because sometimes you'll run a smaller test first, then a larger one that will be more comprehensive. Other times, you may misfire on some early experiments and then tweak the design to get better data. What's important is to capture to the best of our ability what we've determined about our riskiest assumptions relative to the success criteria needed to have our solution work. Now, you want to be honest here. While it can be tempting to bury your failures, try to resist that temptation. Getting all the data we have on the table is important to make the most informed decision possible. So now it's time to set back and take a hard look at what you've learned. As you do, remember to stay in love with the problem, not your solution. So, based on the results of my experiments, I have a bit of a split recommendation here. On one hand, the trainings seem to be working really well. Youth are interested in attending them, employers are hiring the trained youth, everyone seems to be satisfied. On the other hand, I've learned that there's not enough jobs that exist, that even if I trained all the youth in sub-Saharan Africa, they wouldn't have jobs to go to. So I need to look into other options. So what I'm going to recommend here is that we double down on this training program. We scale up the pilot from 100 to 1,000 youth and verify that these results still hold at this larger scale. And I want to also continue to run experiments to improve on the two areas where I haven't yet met my success criteria, namely the retention rate as well as the economics, such that the employers and government are able to pay enough to cover the costs of this program. At the same time, I also want to start exploring other options for youth to have economic opportunities beyond traditional jobs. So for this, I'm going to ask for a budget of $50,000, 5 staff, and 2 months, where I'll come back to review the results and also propose some other options that we might want to consider. There are 3 basic options when you're considering your next steps. First, If your experiments have succeeded and your rate of learning is slowing down, then it's time to double down. This might mean more people, a higher fidelity prototype, or different demographics, whatever will be most helpful to learn more and address your remaining risks. Remember to stay as small as possible, but also to push yourself to new frontiers that may expose other important risks. Second, if your assumptions were invalidated, then it's time to face facts and consider a pivot. Eric defines a pivot as a change of strategy without a change in vision. That is, you might change your business model, solution, or even problem that you're aiming to tackle while keeping your overall goal or North Star. Third, if your experiments have resulted in unclear data, or you're still making good progress learning and refining your model, but you haven't quite landed yet, you may just need some more time. In that case, continue to stay small, revisit your overall validation plan, and ask for the incremental budget you might need to keep going, and set a date to revisit. Finally, it's time to meet with your boss, executives, board, or funders and present them with your findings and ask them to make a decision. How you set up the decision is really important. It can be helpful to have a kickoff meeting even before starting your sprints to get a clear agreement on who the decision maker is, when progress will be reviewed, and what success criteria are going to be used. If you are a decision maker yourself, setting up this process, let the team know what data you would like to see and what results will be necessary for you to approve the next phase. Now, when you're holding your review meeting, focus on the data and the success criteria, not opinions or stories. Everyone will have a different perspective, but the data should drive your decisions. If you don't feel like you have enough data, ask for it. It may make sense to run a few more experiments so you can make the most informed decision possible. And don't forget to celebrate failures. Just because an experiment didn't pan out or a solution didn't work the way you hoped doesn't mean it wasn't a success, because you will have learned something important and saved a potentially enormous amount of time heading down the wrong direction. But if you decide to proceed, don't forget to set a time frame and choose success criteria for the next phase. Thank you again for joining me for these video tutorials. I hope you found them helpful. I do want to emphasize that these worksheets and tutorials are intended as just one set of concrete tools that can help you put Lean Impact into practice. Please don't take them as the right way to do things. The Lean Impact principles are meant to be just that, principles, and are intended to be tailored to your unique circumstances. If you have any questions or are interested in more in-depth training or consulting, please contact me through leanimpact.org or alternatively through the Lean Startup Company. And thank you so much for your support of Lean Impact.